Essentially, it's outright fear-mongering that has caused worldwide economic depression, mass alienation, civil unrest. It's still not a cause for us to lose our joy in Christ. Welcome to No Nonsense Catholic. I'm your host, Matthew Arnold, and the confusion stops here. Welcome back to No Nonsense Catholic, your internet home for Keep It Simple Catholicism. Matthew Arnold for VMPR. I've been talking for some weeks now about finding joy and experiencing peace during these unprecedented times. And they are unprecedented. I mean, sure, you can go back to the Middle Ages and find times of tribulations not entirely like our own, not entirely unlike our own, I should say. The Black Plague was an international pandemic, and it wiped out half the population of Europe starting in the 1340s. And it lasted for years. You know, it wasn't until the early 16th century that the European population, began to reach pre-plague levels again. Now, I saw an article the other day on the Alatia website from a Father Patrick Briscoe, and as always, the link for this will be in the show notes. But he wrote, and I quote, "The Black Death no doubt led to great political unrest. The Holy Roman Empire was in decline. One interregnum," that's the period between emperors, "lasted 67 years. The empire weakened, peasants began to revolt against their lords. No longer did the three estates, those who work, those who pray, and those who fight," which is to say the commoners, the clergy, and the nobility, "no longer did the three estates coexist in harmonious service to God and the common good. The peasants felt the burdens of heavy taxation and absentee government. They responded with riots." Sounds familiar, right? But there's more. "Today, certain personalities within the church sow discord as they undermine the confidence that laity should have in their bishops' governing and teaching." This Father Briscoe criticizing the traditionalists, and especially sedevacantists, who think that there's been no valid pope since Pius XII. He says, "These facets of internet Catholicism call to mind the Western Schism, when three men were concurrently claiming to be pope and excommunicating each other. This calamitous state of affairs lasted a jaw-dropping 39 years. This was the 14th century, and this is the litany of its evils, which are not so different from our own," unquote. Now, Father goes on to talk about the medieval saints that were raised up by God to help the situation. My question is, where's our army of saints today? And more to the point, in his comparison, he compares COVID-19 to the Black Plague. But, the Black Plague really did change everything in the 14th century because of the turmoil that was caused by the death of half of the entire European population. Whereas COVID-19 has yet to claim as many lives as this year's seasonal flu. Considerably more people die from accidents, simple accidents in the home than COVID-19. It is government's wildly disproportionate, their unprecedented reaction to the virus, which is essentially, it's outright fear-mongering, that has caused worldwide economic depression, mass alienation, civil unrest, and all the rest of the litany of evil that we are experiencing. But the fact that this is primarily a self-inflicted wound, I think Phil Lawler the other day described it as a cultural suicide attempt, it's still not a cause for us to lose our joy in Christ. I saw another article called 5 Bible Verses to Help You Find Joy by Rick Hamlin. And I'll have the URL for that up as well. And it got me thinking. The verses that he shared resonated with me, and I want to share them with you along with my commentary, naturally, in hopes that they'll resonate with you also. And first, just a little bit of context. These are all passages from the letter to the Philippians. And when St. Paul wrote that letter in 61 AD, he was imprisoned. And he and his companions had founded the church at Philippi on his second missionary journey that you can read about in Acts chapter 16. And the community in Philippi was the first Christian church established on the European continent. That alone makes this letter important, considering the fact that in our day, all the world's ills are being blamed on the European church, and European Christians and their descendants. And Paul was writing to thank this European church for their generosity and to encourage them in their faith. And there's several themes in his letter: gratitude, humility, self-sacrifice, unity, but especially for our purposes, joy. And the truth that believers can experience profound peace and joy regardless of their circumstances, because of the peace that comes not from the world, but from Christ. And so Catholic Christians, and that's you and I, can experience joy even in the time of COVID-19, because our joy does not depend on outward circumstances, but inward strength, and namely the inward strength of Christ within us, like we were talking about in the first segment. So I'd like to look at these few verses from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians that seem especially relevant to our current situation. Now, you're going to know the first one, very famous, is from Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I shall say it again, rejoice. You know, when you remember that St. Paul was in prison at this time, that he was deprived of his personal freedom, he gives those words, I think, a special power in our current situation. Because his attitude is an important example for us to follow. That, like him, our inner attitude need not reflect our outward circumstances. Let that sink in. St. Paul was full of joy even in prison, because he knew that no matter what happened, Jesus Christ was with him. And he urges the Philippians to be joyful several times in this letter. And I suspect it was something that they needed to hear, just like you and I do today. And if we're not feeling joyful lately, it may be that we're not looking at things from the right perspective. And what is the right perspective? That's ultimate joy comes from Christ dwelling within us, and that we will experience that joy in its fullness only when we see Christ face to face. So